Hey, everyone, welcome back. It's time for another deep dive. And today we're tackling a term that I'm sure you've heard before, probably debated about online a few times, maybe even argued about with your in-laws at
Well,
Thanksgiving.
yeah, I know that feeling.
We're talking about cultural Marxism. And we're not here to just throw around buzzwords, right? We want to cut through all the noise and get to the heart of the arguments, especially like looking at this book you shared.
Yeah, this one's a doozy. It goes deep, really tries to lay out how this concept has shaped the world around us.
Yeah, so we're going to try to unpack that. And we're going to be working with, as I said, this book that dives deep into cultural Marxism. And it seems to touch on everything from like the way kids are taught in schools to the dynamics in our own relationships and families, even like national politics.
It's pretty ambitious. That's what makes this deep dive so interesting. The book really lays out a specific case, and our job is to make sure you understand what the author is saying. Not necessarily telling you whether to agree or disagree, but just like, here are the arguments.
Yeah.
Exactly. Gotta lay it all out. So buckle up, everyone, because this book takes us all the way back to the early 20th century, to a group of intellectuals known as the Frankfurt School. Now, these were mostly academics in Germany who they were kind of disillusioned with traditional communism.
Yeah, they felt like it hadn't delivered on its promises, the societal changes they were hoping for.
Right. Didn't bring about that utopia.
Not quite.
So instead of focusing on like economics like the traditional Marxists, they decided to target culture. They thought that was the key to actually reshaping society. And this was a pretty big shift in thinking at the time.
Yeah, it was revolutionary for its time. Instead of worrying about who owned the factories and all that, they started looking at things like art, education, even like how families function, the whole structure.
So instead of who owns the means of production, it's like who owns the means of cultural production. You got it. They believed that if you really wanted to change a society, you have to change the way people think, the values they hold, the culture that kind of shapes their worldview. It's all
I
connected.
can see how that might connect to some of the things going on in today's world, right? A lot of debates going on around values and how we see the world and all that.
Absolutely.
The book actually mentions some of the big thinkers from this school, like Max Horkheimer, Theodore Adorno, Herbert Marcuse. And it's interesting because they were really focused on challenging traditional Western values, kind of like questioning the foundations of, Western society.
When you think about the big issues we're grappling with today, gender roles, what it means to be a man in today's world, family structures, these are all areas where those traditional Western values are being, challenged, debated, questioned.
That's like they saw this coming.
Yeah.
Laid the groundwork for all these cultural shifts that we're seeing right now.
That's what the book is arguing, yeah.
Whoa. Okay, so this is more than just like some dusty old theory, right?
Right.
This stuff is actually relevant to what's happening today.
That's the idea.
But to understand like how these Frankfurt School guys thought this change would happen, there's this other thinker we got to talk about, Antonio Gramsci. He was an Italian Marxist who came up with this idea of cultural hegemony.
Yeah, Gramsci. He's a key figure in this whole thing.
Cultural what now?
Hegemony. It's a mouthful, I know. But basically, it means that the dominant groups in society, they stay in power not just through force or money, but by shaping the cultural norm. The beliefs that we all kind of accept as normal without even thinking about it. It's subtle.
Oh, so it's kind of like the air we breathe, we don't even realize it's there, but he's shaping how we live and think?
Yeah, exactly. Like the water we swim in. You just assume that's how it is.
Okay, I get it. So Gramsci believed that if you wanted to change, like, the power structure of a society, you had to change the culture itself, like get to the root of things. And he saw institutions like schools, the media, even pop culture as like battlegrounds for this cultural struggle.
It's where the ideas get played out,
This is getting pretty deep, pretty fast.
We're just getting warmed up.
So all these ideas, this cultural hegemony, it's all very fascinating. But, I'm a simple guy. How does this connect back to me? To like the everyday guy who's just trying to navigate work, life, relationship?
Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack as we go deeper into this book.
Okay, so bring it on.
The author argues that those Frankfurt School ideas, this whole concept of targeting culture to change society, it's had a huge impact on the world we live in today.
All right, give me an example. Let's get specific.
Okay, let's start with something the book calls the victim hierarchy. It's this idea that certain groups are portrayed as more oppressed than others. And it creates this kind of like competition for victimhood status.
Oh, I think I've seen that online. Like everyone's trying to one-up each other with how much they've been wronged or marginalized.
Right. Precisely. And the book argues that this dynamic actually shuts down productive conversations. Instead of actually trying to address injustice, it becomes more about who gets to claim the most victim points, like it's a game or something.
The book, it uses some pretty interesting examples to illustrate this, right?
Oh, absolutely. Like, remember the Jussie Smollett case?
Oh, yeah. How could I forget that one?
Yeah, a celebrity claiming to be the victim of a hate crime that turned out to be completely fabricated.
Yeah, it was a whole big thing. So is the book saying that this whole victim hierarchy idea, it like creates an environment where that kind of stuff can happen, where truth gets twisted to fit a narrative?
That's one of the arguments, yeah. It also points to things like the explosion of safe spaces and trigger warnings as examples of this dynamic in action.
Okay, so we've got these like radical thinkers from the early 1900s planting the seeds for this cultural shift, right? And now, fast forward to today, and their ideas are popping up like everywhere, from online arguments to college campuses to the way we talk about like race and gender.
It's pretty wild when you think about it.
It's like their ideas went viral before the internet even existed.
Something like that. And as we dig deeper into the book, we're going to see how the author argues that these ideas have manifested in even bigger ways. Like, they're impacting our institutions, our understanding of relationships, and even challenging the very definition of truth.
Whoa, that sounds pretty intense.
It is. Buckle up.
I'm ready. So this victim hierarchy thing, you know, it sounds like it has some serious real-world consequences.
It definitely does. And as we move forward, we'll see how the book links this concept to things like the changing roles of men in society and the challenges facing the traditional family unit.
Okay, hit me with it. How does this victim hierarchy actually play out in the lives of men today?
All right, welcome back to our deep dive into cultural Marxism. Before we jump to the break, we're starting to look at how this idea of a victim hierarchy might actually be playing out in the lives of men, you know, like specifically.
And honestly, it's kind of unnerving as a guy, you know, to think that some of the struggles, you know, I'm facing in my own life could be connected to these bigger, you know, cultural forces, you know? Like, is it all in my head? Or is there something bigger going on?
And that's the kind of question this book is really encouraging us to ask, you know? It's pushing back on that idea that, like, oh, this is just a personal experience, you know? You're just making it up. Maybe there's a pattern here.
Right, yeah. Okay, so let's connect the dots then. How does this book tie the victim hierarchy to the, like, you know, to the challenges that men are facing today? Like, specifically, what are they talking about?
Well, the book is making the case that, like, traditional masculinity itself is under attack. And it's not just coming from like radical activists or whatever. It's coming from institutions that are like, you know, supposed to be neutral. Like, for example, the American Psychological Association.
Oh, wow. The APA. Really? Okay, so what do they have to do with all this?
Well, the book actually points to their guidelines, like from 2019, that label traditional masculine traits like as potentially harmful. You know, things like stoicism, competitiveness, risk-taking, all that stuff, like classic male stuff.
Yeah.
You know, things that have been like associated with men for a long time, you know, being a man.
Now they're saying that these very fundamental traits are potentially harmful. I mean, these are the qualities that build civilizations. Like these are like, you know, the things that drove innovation, helped us, you know, help men provide and protect and all that.
Yeah, and that's exactly the kind of disconnect that the book is highlighting, you know? It's suggesting that these guidelines, they kind of pathologize traditional male behavior, like frame it as something that needs to be corrected, you know, even eliminated.
Wow. So instead of celebrating those traits, or at least, you know, like acknowledging that they can be positive in certain contexts, right? Like competition can be a good thing. They're just like straight up framing it as toxic. That's kind of concerning, to be honest.
Yeah, and the book actually links this back to the victim hierarchy, arguing that it kind of positions men as the, like, oppressors in society, you know? The ones who need to be re-educated. You know, kind of creates this dynamic where men are constantly on the defensive, feeling like they have to apologize for just being men.
Yeah, I could see how that would lead to a lot of frustration and resentment, you know? It's like you're being told that, like, who you are at your core is inherently wrong, you know? Like, you're bad just for existing.
Exactly. And it's not just about, you know, men feeling bad about themselves. The book actually argues that this attack on masculinity, it also undermines the traditional family unit.
Okay, yeah. I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together now. But how does attacking masculinity, how does that lead to, like, problems with family?
Well, the book suggests that by, like, devaluing those traditional masculine traits, it kind of disrupts that natural balance of roles within the family. Like the classic model, you know, the husband's the provider and protector, the wife is the nurturer or homemaker, that kind of thing. Right. That model's being challenged, and it's even being, like, demonized in a lot of cases.
Right, so it's like they're saying these roles are, like, outdated or oppressive, even though, like, you know, they've worked for centuries, you know. Family structures have always, like, evolved over time, right?
Right.
What's so, like, detrimental about this particular change, like, in the book's view? Like, what's the big deal?
That's a good question. And the book acknowledges, like you said, change is inevitable, right? Things are constantly evolving. But it's suggesting that this current push to redefine family, it's coming from an ideology, a specific ideology that's actually trying to dismantle the traditional family altogether. Like, it's not just about adapt, it's about, like, destroying.
Okay, so it's not just about, like, accepting different types of families, like different structures. It's about, like, getting rid of this one specific traditional model. But why? Like, what's the most benefit of that? You know, like, what's the end game?
Well, the book suggests that those who are, like, pushing this cultural Marxism idea, they see the traditional family as a source of oppression, particularly for women. You know, they see it as, like, reinforcing these patriarchal power structures that need to be...
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I could see how someone might, view traditional gender roles as, like, restrictive or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But to say that the whole concept of family is inherently oppressive, like, I don't know. This seems a little extreme, doesn't it?
Well, that's exactly the kind of critical thinking that the book's encouraging you to do, right? Like, it doesn't shy away from presenting these controversial viewpoints, but it also challenges you to, like, question the underlying assumptions, like, is this really true? What are the implications of this?
Yeah, good point. Okay, so we've got this, attack on masculinity, which the book ties to this larger effort to redefine the family, right? But how is all this actually playing out in the real world? I mean, I see families all around me that seem to be doing just fine. So, like, is this just an academic theory? Or is this actually happening?
That's where things get really interesting. The book argues that we're actually seeing the consequences of this cultural shift playing out in, like, everything, from rising divorce rates to fatherlessness to the increasing number of young men, who are struggling to find their place in society. Like, it's having real world impacts.
So you're saying, like, these personal struggles, these individual struggles that guys are facing, the book is saying that they're not just, like, random things that happen. They're actually symptoms of this bigger cultural shift.
That's exactly the connection it's making. It's saying that what we're experiencing as individuals, those personal struggles, they might actually be connected to these, like, deeper ideological currents that are, like, reshaping our society as a whole.
Yeah, that's a pretty heavy thought, to be honest. Like, it makes you feel like you're, like, caught in a riptide or something, like you're just being pulled along by forces that are way bigger than yourself.
And that sense of powerlessness, feeling like you're being swept away, that's something the book addresses directly. It argues that, yeah, we might feel like victims of these cultural forces, but we also have the power to resist them.
Okay, all right, I want to hear about that, how to resist. But before we go there, let's kind of zoom out a little bit. We've been talking a lot about families, masculinity, but the book also claims that cultural Marxism is impacting our institutions, right? Like schools, the media, even the government. Like, the big stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And understanding how this ideology has kind of seeped into these powerful structures, that's crucial to understanding the bigger picture. No, it's not just about individual beliefs or choices. It's about how those beliefs are being reflected and reinforced, at a societal level.
Okay, yes. Sure. Let's go there. What does the book say about how cultural Marxism has infiltrated these institutions? Like, specifically, how has it happened?
Well, it starts by arguing that, like, universities, right, which are supposed to be these centers of free thought, open debate, all that, they've actually become increasingly dominated by a single ideology.
Oh, so it's like they're becoming echo chambers.
Yeah.
Where, like, only certain viewpoints are allowed. I mean, I've heard that argument before.
Yeah. And the book goes into detail about how this has happened. It talks about the rise of political correctness and how it's basically being used to silence dissenting voices, especially those who challenge the cultural Marxist narrative.
So it's like you can't even, like, question certain ideas without being labeled as a bigot or, like, worse.
That's the kind of chilling effect that the book is described. It suggests that this climate of fear and censorship has created a situation where, like, a lot of academics are afraid to speak their minds, even if they disagree with what's being taught.
Yeah, that's pretty disturbing, to be honest. Like, what happened to the idea of a university being a marketplace of ideas? Like, where you can actually debate and challenge different perspectives and stuff.
Well, the book argues that ideal has been eroded. Like, it's been chipped away at. And it points to, like, several examples of professors being punished or silenced, for expressing views that went against the prevailing ideology.
Oh, okay, but it's not just about what's happening in the classroom, right?
Yeah.
The book also talks about how this ideology is impacting research and funding as well, right?
Absolutely. It argues that, like, research funding, the money that goes into these studies, it's often skewed to favor projects that align with, a cultural Marxist agenda. So, if you're a scientist studying, say, like, the biological differences between men and women, like real science,
Right.
you're less likely to get funding than someone who's studying, gender as a social construct, which is a more, culturally accepted viewpoint.
So it's like they're controlling the narrative by controlling the money. If you want to get your research funded, you got to play by their rules.
Yeah, that's one of the implications. And it also talks about how, like, the peer review process, which is supposed to be about ensuring quality, making sure the research is good, it's being used to filter out research that challenges the dominant narrative. Like, even if you get the research done, if it doesn't fit their worldview, it might not even get published.
Wow. So it's like every step of the way, there's this, like, filter that's making sure that only certain ideas get through.
Exactly. That's the kind of systemic bias that the books highlight. It's not just about individual opinions or preference. It's about how those ideologies are, like, baked into the structures of our institutions. Like, the system itself is biased.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so we got universities, research funding, all that. What about the media? They have a huge influence on how people see the world.
Right. You're absolutely right. And the book doesn't hold back in its critique of the media, like, at all. It argues that the mainstream media has basically become a tool, a powerful tool for promoting cultural Marxist ideas, and often at the expense of, like, objectivity and truth.
Yeah, I mean, the media has always had a bias, right? It's not exactly a secret that different outlets lean left or right or whatever.
That's true. But the book's arguing that this goes beyond, like, traditional political biases, It's suggesting that the media is actively pushing a cultural Marxist agenda, shaping the narrative in a way that, reinforces that victim hierarchy we were talking about and undermines traditional values.
Okay, I get it. So give me an example. Like, how is this actually playing out in the news we consume every day? Like, what does this look like?
Well, think about the way certain stories are framed, The book argues that the media often focuses on narratives that highlight the oppression of certain groups,
right,
but then they downplay or ignore stories that don't fit that narrative. So it's like they're cherry picking, They're selectively choosing which stories to tell and how to tell them in order to push a specific agenda.
So it's not just about, like, reporting the facts. It's about using those facts to shape a narrative that supports their worldview.
That's exactly it. And by controlling the information that we receive, the media can shape our perceptions of the world. They can influence our beliefs about what's right and wrong, what's good and bad, all of that. It's very powerful.
This is starting to sound a little, I don't know, like a conspiracy theory almost. Like, is this real?
Yeah, I get it. It can be easy to dismiss these ideas as, like, fringe or paranoid or whatever. But the book presents them in a way that encourages you to think critically about the information you're consuming. Like, don't just take it at face value. Question it.
Yeah. Okay, I'm definitely, like, more aware now of the potential for bias in all of this. In academia, in the media, in research, all that. But how does this all connect back to, like, what we were talking about earlier about, men, families, those struggles? What's the connection?
That's a great question, and it's something we'll explore in more depth in the next part. The book argues that the media plays a crucial role in shaping our understanding of gender roles and relationships, often in ways that reinforce that cultural Marxist agenda we were talking about.
Okay, yeah, I'm ready for that. But before we go there, let's take a quick breather. Let's just recap what we've covered so far, right?
So we started by looking at how the book argues that traditional masculinity is under attack.
Right.
And how that connects to that larger effort to redefine the family unit, kind of break down those traditional structures.
Right.
And then we talk about how these ideas, they've infiltrated academia, from the classroom to research funding. It's creating this system that can actually silence dissenting voices. Like, if you don't agree, you're out.
Yeah, it's like they're controlling the narrative from the top down.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And finally, we started to unpack the media's role in shaping our perceptions of the world, often in ways that, again, align with that cultural Marxist agenda.
Yeah. Man, this has been a lot to take in, to be honest.
I know, right?
But I'm already starting to see the world through, like, a new lens. It's like I'm noticing things that I never paid attention to before. Like, little biases and assumptions.
That's the power of critical thinking, man.
Yeah.
And in the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore how all of this connects back to your personal life, your relationships, your role as a man in today's society, all that. Like, how do you actually navigate this stuff?
All right. I'm ready for it. Let's dive back in.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, going all the way back to those intellectuals in the early 1900s to the way our institutions function today.
Yeah, it's been quite the journey, hasn't it? And we're about to go even deeper into the rabbit hole, so to speak.
Oh boy, I'm a little scared, but also intrigued,
I get it. But remember, we're just trying to lay out the arguments from this book you shared with us so we can see how these ideas might be playing out in our lives. Right. No indoctrination here, just trying to understand the argument, okay? So bring it home for me, We've talked about families, schools, the media, but how does all this actually play out in the lives of, everyday men? Like, what does it mean for guys like me trying to navigate this crazy world?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And the book argues that one of the most powerful tools of cultural Marxism, and this is a subtle one, it's the manipulation of language. Words have power, and the way we use them can actually shape our perceptions of reality.
Oh, yeah, we touched on that earlier, like how words like equality and social justice can be used to push agendas that aren't actually about equality or justice.
Exactly. The book digs deeper into that, suggesting that cultural Marxists, and again, this is just what the book is arguing, they've become masters at twisting language to fit their narrative, They'll take words with positive connotations like diversity or inclusion and use them to justify actions that might actually be harmful or, go against those very principles.
Give me a real world example. How does this play out, like, on the ground in our daily lives?
Well, take the word diversity, for example. Most people would agree that diversity is a good thing, right? Like different perspectives, different backgrounds, all that. But the book argues that it's often used to justify hiring and promotion practices that prioritize certain groups over others, even if it means sacrificing merit or competence.
So it's like using the language of equality to actually create more inequality. That's pretty sneaky.
The book also points to terms like microaggressions and trigger warnings as ways to control language and silence dissent, These concepts, while they might have started with good intentions, can be weaponized to shut down conversations and create a climate of fear where people are afraid to speak their minds because they might offend someone.
Oh man, I've totally experienced that. It's like you can't even express an opinion anymore without worrying about being labeled insensitive or, worse, being canceled or something. It's exhausting walking on eggshells all the time.
Exactly. And that's kind of the point, right? By controlling language, they can control the debate. They get to decide what's acceptable to say and what's not. And that effectively silences anyone who challenges their worldview.
Language is one weapon in their arsenal. What else does the book highlight? Like, what other tactics are they using?
Well, another key tactic, and this is a big one, is what the book calls the war on truth. It argues that cultural Marxists are actively trying to undermine the very concept of objective truth, replacing it with subjective perception and feelings.
Well, hold on. That sounds a little out there. So instead of there being like a shared reality we can all agree on, it's like everyone gets to make up their own truth. Doesn't that lead to chaos?
That's one of the concerns the book raises, yeah. It suggests that this rejection of objective truth has led to a situation where feelings trump facts, and logic and reason are often dismissed in favor of emotional narrative. Like, if it feels true to you, it must be true, regardless of what the evidence says.
I mean, I can see how that could be appealing, Like, who wants to be constrained by facts and logic all the time? But yeah, it also sounds like a recipe for disaster. Can you give me, like, a real-world example of how this plays out?
Sure. Think about the transgender debate, for example. The book argues that the idea that a person can choose their gender, regardless of their biological sex, is a prime example of this war on truth. It suggests that this ideology denies basic biological realities and can have harmful consequences, particularly for women.
Yeah, that's a really complex issue, and it's one that's generating a lot of heat these days. I can see how the book would view this as a battleground for what they're calling this war on truth.
Right. The book also points to the rejection of certain scientific studies, particularly those related to differences between men and women, as further evidence of this trend. It argues that any research that challenges the idea of gender as a social construct is often dismissed as biased or even dangerous.
So it's like even science isn't safe from this ideological battle. That's kind of scary, to be honest. It's like they're trying to reshape reality itself to fit their worldview, even if it means denying basic facts.
That's a strong statement, but it gets to the heart of what the book is arguing. And it's not just about abstract philosophical debates either. The book suggests that this war on truth has very real-world consequences, impacting everything from education to law to healthcare.
Wow. Okay, so we've got the manipulation of language, the war on truth, What else? What's the ultimate goal of all of this, according to the book?
Well, all of this ties back to what the book sees as the ultimate goal of cultural Marxism, the dismantling of traditional values.
Right, we talked about that in the context of family structures, but it sounds like it goes even deeper than that, right?
It does. The book suggests that cultural Marxists view traditional values, such as religion, patriotism, even the concept of individual responsibility, as obstacles to their utopian vision of a society free from all forms of oppression. Like, these values are holding us back from achieving true utopia.
So it's not just about changing how we think about gender or family. It's about fundamentally reshaping the moral and cultural foundations of our entire society.
That's the core of the argument, yes. And the book suggests that this project is well underway, with traditional values being eroded in every area of life, from education to entertainment to the legal system.
Wow, this is heavy stuff. It's starting to feel like we're living in a completely different world than the one our parents grew up in. Like the rules of the game have changed, but no one bothered to tell us.
That sense of disorientation is something the book acknowledges, and it addresses it directly. It argues that a lot of people feel lost and confused because the cultural landscape is shifting so rapidly beneath our feet, and they don't know how to make sense of it all.
So what do we do? If these forces are as powerful and pervasive as the book claims, is there any way to resist them, or are we just doomed?
The book argues that while the challenges are real, they're not insurmountable. There's still hope. It suggests several strategies for resistance, starting with the most important one: critical thinking.
Yeah, okay, I get that. Critical thinking is important. But how do we actually apply that to this situation? It's not like these ideas are always presented in a clear and obvious way. They're often subtle, disguised as something positive, like we were talking about with language.
You're right, it's not always easy. The book encourages readers to question everything. Don't just accept the narratives being presented by the media, academia, or even popular culture, Develop a healthy skepticism. Learn to identify the underlying assumptions and agendas behind the information you consume, like who's saying this and what's their motivation.
So it's like becoming a cultural detective, looking for clues and patterns and hidden agendas.
Exactly. The book also stresses the importance of seeking out alternative sources of information, those that challenge the dominant narrative. Don't just stay in your echo chamber. Get out there and expose yourself to different perspectives.
Makes sense, but it feels like those alternative voices are often drowned out by the mainstream, It's hard to even find them sometimes.
That's true, but the book argues that supporting those alternative voices is crucial to counteracting the cultural hegemony of the mainstream. This could mean seeking out independent media outlets, supporting organizations that align with traditional values, or even just having honest conversations with friends and family who might be open to hearing a different perspective.
So it's not just about changing our own mind. It's about engaging in the cultural battle and trying to win others over to our side.
The book definitely seems to suggest that, It argues that cultural Marxism thrives on silence and apathy. The more people who are willing to speak out and challenge the dominant narrative, the less power it has to control the conversation.
And this has been a mind-blowing deep dive. I mean, we've gone from these obscure intellectuals to the way our language is being manipulated to this war on truth that's literally reshaping reality itself. It's a lot to process, and honestly, it's a little overwhelming.
I hear you. It's dense material, and it challenges a lot of the assumptions we often take for granted. But that's also what makes it so valuable. It pushes us to think critically, to question the world around us, and to not just accept things blindly.
Well, I definitely feel like I'm seeing things in a new light now. It's not always comfortable, but it's definitely thought-provoking.
That's what a deep dive like this is all about, right? It's about exploring ideas, even controversial ones, and trying to understand how they might be shaping our world. Whether we agree with them or not, these ideas have power.
Absolutely. Well, you've definitely achieved that, and I think our listeners will appreciate this journey, even if it's a little bumpy at times.
I hope so. And if anyone's interested in going even deeper into these ideas, exploring them in more detail, I encourage you to check out the full book. It's available on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
Awesome. Great recommendation. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this intense deep dive into cultural Marxism. It's a complex and often controversial topic, but it's one that we believe is worth grappling with. So keep those minds sharp, keep asking those tough questions, and keep searching for the truth. We'll see you on the next deep dive.